Good afternoon and welcome to our fourth session of our Get Inspired Week, a series of conversations where we bring speakers together to share their insights and key learnings on ways to adopt innovative and business-led circular strategies. Today's theme is all around food and drink. And we'll be predominantly looking at the role that Glasgow's businesses can play when it comes to transforming the global food system. With cities soon expected to consume over 80% of food globally, I'm wondering, how do we harness the power of our cities? And how do we use that influence to look at how we grow and how we produce our food to the benefit of our economy, human health and sustainability? There's no doubt about it. The current system is wasteful, it's polluting, and it's unhealthy. In fact, food processing alone accounts for more than 20% of Scotland's carbon footprint. And 1/3 of food produced for human consumption is wasted annually. And that's even before it gets to our plates. It's a staggering amount, and that's why the Scottish Government has introduced targets to look at reducing food waste by 33% by 2025. So the question is, how do food and drink industries tap into the potential of circular economy to drive that ambition, but also to support the recovery from COVID-19? Glasgow is already taking steps with initiatives such as the Glasgow City Food Plan that looks at how do we ensure that there's healthy food that's accessible for everybody. In addition to that, we've got our partners, Zero Waste Scotland, who are driving forward a whole portfolio of business support mechanisms for you as organisations who are looking to take that step. So how do we, as the business community, build and accelerate on the work that's already being done? Well, I'm absolutely delighted that we've got a fantastic lineup of speakers for you here today. But it's not all about listening to our speakers. We're really keen to get you involved in the bigger conversation. And I'd like to invite you to participate by using the chat function. We'd simply ask that you give your name, your organisation and your question, and I'll do my very best to thread as many of those questions through today's conversation. Obviously, the conversation is ongoing through our social media, and if you don't already, please do follow Circular Glasgow, the hashtag Circular Future. And finally, this session will be recorded and will be available from Friday on the Glasgow Chamber of Commerce YouTube channel. So, without further ado, I'd really like to introduce my first speaker, Emma Chow. Emma, hi, good to see you.
Hi, nice to see you too.
Emma leads on the Ellen MacArthur Foundation Food Initiative, which brings together major industry players from across the whole food chain. Taking a systematic approach, her work looks to unlock the powerful potential of the food system. So Emma, how's your week shaping up and where are you calling from?
Yeah, I am calling from the Isle of Wight, which is in England, little island. I'm in the office right now. This is where our headquarters is. And for those who are new to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, we are officially now 10 years old. So it's been an exciting couple of weeks actually with full team celebrations in COVID-19 scenarios. But I'll be working from home starting tomorrow because of the government's announcements. So you're catching me at perhaps one of my last meetings in the office.
Oh, so make the most of it. But many happy returns for your 10th birthday.
Thank you.
So, Emma, I thoroughly enjoyed the Foundation's Big Food Workshop series that you ran earlier in the summer. And introducing the sessions, Ellen MacArthur, she referred to food systems themselves holding huge potential and opportunities to solve some of the greatest global challenges. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, Emma. I went through to my kitchen, I opened my fridge, I analysed what was in there, and I was scratching my head. What did Ellen mean by that?
Yeah, no, it's a really great point, and it's something that I see as quite unique and special to food, is how food is it touches so many aspects of our lives, so far beyond just the most fundamental, basic value that it brings of fueling our bodies with nutrition to get through our day. So there's the human health component, right? And that is a major challenge, and increasing food security challenges that we're seeing, especially in light of COVID-19. So that's one big area, is the just nutrition and food access component. But then when we get to the other impacts that food touches, because food, we're constantly growing food. It's coming from nature. And right now, the way that we produce food is, as you mentioned, hugely damaging and harmful. But actually, nature is inherently regenerative. So if we change the way that we're producing food, it holds big potential to be a big part of the solution for these global challenges like biodiversity loss and climate change, clean air, clean water, healthier, more livable cities. So there's all these different aspects. And also when we think of the economic piece of jobs and farmer livelihoods, there's so many dimensions. And there's one, some folks tuning in today, they may have seen several years ago on the Eat Forum, there was a presentation of just how food is this, you can think of it as this column that touches all of the different sustainable development goals. And it's very difficult to look at any other industry or sector out there that touches literally all of them. So we have to account for this huge potential that food presents.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think it's a really good example that, we all have a relationship with food. So therefore, being able to reflect on the Sustainable Development Goals and how they relate to us individually, I think that's really helpful. Following the publication of the Cities and Circular Economy for Food report at the World Economic Forum, you guys then went on to launch your food initiative. So I guess I was really keen to find out a little bit more about what the food initiative is and why it's important. And I suppose just keeping in the back of our minds as well, what its relation is, why it's important with COVID as well.
Yeah. So to give a bit of context too, just in our approach, because here at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, our overall mission is to accelerate the global transition to a circular economy. And one of our core areas of work is actually looking at specific industries or material flows. We started with plastics packaging, which is now in its 4th year. We also have a program on fashion and food. And then most recently, just 2 weeks ago, we launched our finance initiative. So a bit different because it's an enabler and not a material flow. But those are for what we call systemic initiatives. And we take an approach with these, as you mentioned, first doing a deep dive into the analysis, understanding what in today's food system, in this case, defines it as linear, in that it's extractive of finite resources and dependent on those. It's wasteful, damaging, and simply not going to work long term. We can't just try and tweak the current system to try and undo the damage, because that's simply putting the end date of when we run out of those finite resource stocks a little later. But actually, what we need to do is fundamentally redesign the system. And if we get that right, we can actually be generating good for the environment, for people, for businesses now and long term. So that's our big picture approach and thinking. And we've been applying that now to food for the past year and a half since we launched the food initiative in June of 2019. And it's been a process of bringing together key actors, global food system players from across industry, from across the value chain, and also with a big emphasis on the role of cities. So we're working with London, Sao Paulo, and New York as 3 of our partner cities to be supporting on-the-ground demonstration of what does this abstract concept of circular economy actually look like applied to food in different contexts. And food is so place-based, right? Unlike plastics, where you can have the same plastic water bottle all over the world, it's difficult to look at fruit and say, yes, we can paint a silver bullet solution that will be fit for purpose in all geographies and places. So that's what we've been learning a lot about over this past year and a half. And we have another year and a half to go in this current, what we call mobilization phase, which is all about showcasing that this vision laid out in the report can be put into practice in scalable, replicable ways and get us to a new trajectory towards this 2050 vision laid out in the report that identified that about $2.7 trillion worth of economic, health, and environmental benefits would be realized if cities around the world took these actions.
Gosh, thank you very much. I mean, that's really helpful for setting the scene. And I guess I'm curious, how well has it been received by cities?
Yes, I'm realizing that I didn't pick up on the last part of your last question, which was in relationship to COVID-19. And I would say that pickup has actually increased on just circular food systems, circular economy for food, whatever phrase you want to use. My team, at least, has received a lot more requests for having conversations, for presenting, because of the need to design resilient food systems and the importance of having diverse sourcing, where if we look at our current linear system, it's also hugely centralized and global. And there's some real rewiring, as I like to think of it, of the logic of supply chains so that we're actually reconnecting with existing local supply. And that's often referred to as short chains, short supply chains, and that's seen as part of the circularity of material flows coming in and out of cities and their surrounding rural peri-urban areas. So I would say that the interest in the topic and the idea has been increasing significantly, especially over the past 6 months or so. And even before that, actually, because now with COVID-19, it shifted, at least for city municipalities, right, the governments, their priorities became very immediate for helping to ensure that people were getting food in the cities. And that's still where their focus largely lies. So what we're doing with the city is really trying to proactively understand how the priorities are shifting, how circular economy practically we can be applying these principles of designing out waste and pollution, keeping materials in use, regenerating natural systems to help with solutions to meet these priorities better and faster.
Great. Thank you. I mean, obviously, our work is very much based around the city of Glasgow, and I'm very aware with one city how many stakeholders you have to deal with and the challenges of that. How do you manage to get traction with the cities when you're dealing with so many different stakeholders, and not only within one city, but we're talking about globally? So how do you sort of trial what works and then scale it up, I suppose?
Yeah, well, that is exactly what we're in the midst of doing. And with this mobilization phase, what we are doing is taking risks and trying to demonstrate what new ways of working look like. And what we've already learned so far, even with the 3 partner cities that I mentioned earlier, all of them are set up differently, right? Any municipal government is, when it comes to food, is structured in a different way. In some cases, they might have a food policy team. In most, they don't. But food and then the waste and sanitation crosses all these different departments, which tend to, just like in companies, tend to operate in silos. So part of the work that we did starting last year was have these workshops with the local consortia. So it's about bringing together the relevant actors from within the city government, but also a collection of both local SMEs, for instance, and innovators, other NGOs who are embedded in that ecosystem and implementing, and also global companies that have footprints. So that might be a global food manufacturing company who has a major factory in the vicinity of the city. So that has been a process in itself of just identifying who those actors are and starting to activate local consortia and bring them together for the first time ever. And often, even within the cities, what we found is so much value in helping to stimulate the connections across departments and realizing, okay, I work in sanitation and I've never spoken with the procurement who's responsible for the school feeding program. But actually, what does it mean to take a more holistic system perspective to our urban food system as a city and say, there's value in the organic matter in that's the sanitation group is managing, and procurement wants to be supporting farmers using better practices. Well, hey, there's a potential there to see how we can drive innovations that can safely take what otherwise would be waste and a cost to cities to get back out to fields and be supporting shifts to more regenerative practices. So that in itself takes a lot of patience, takes a willingness to test new ways of working, good facilitation and convening, and not always getting it right as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you raised some really valid points. And, I particularly like the thinking around bringing different actors together and just engaging in a conversation. And it's amazing what spawns from that, new initiatives that nobody even thought about, So, yeah, absolutely. Have you had any major challenges? Like, if you were to give an example of one of your biggest challenges, what would that be?
Yeah, I would say in general, it's when it comes to working with cities, which tend to be especially resource strapped. So even getting the right buy-in and understanding how circular economy, it doesn't need to be an extra add-on. That's not what we want to be doing with the cities. It's actually about understanding how this gets embedded as a solution framework to help, as I mentioned earlier, help move faster towards existing priorities. So just understanding, I think that is a big challenge, is understanding that every city has a different set of priorities. So if they've signed agreements, for instance, with zero waste priorities or climate targets, those are set existing priorities. And then it's been a process of understanding how we position circular economy in the most relevant way to help them move faster and to support the champions, right? Because it might just be one person within an entire city government, to be able to socialize it internally and get the buy-in. So I think that in itself, again, is a big challenge to just develop that narrative and the evidence base and story that's really compelling and the why, and then identify the who along the way and who needs to be buying in, and then building on that is how to effectively interface between public-private sector and not just within the perhaps innovator space where some cities might have kind of support programs for innovators, for instance, but how to actually get all the relevant of different size businesses at the table and involved in ways that are going to be collaborative and kind of following the set protocols as well that cities have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in terms of cities having different agendas, different priorities, that can absolutely be a challenge. But I suppose as well, on the flip side, it can also be a strength. It can be a USP for that city or that region. And actually, that USP in itself could potentially be the narrative that brings all these collaborators together. So I suppose there's different ways to skin a cat. Emma, I'm really keen to widen the conversation, and I'm going to ask you another question, and then what I'd like to do is to bring in the other panel members. But I'm really conscious that the stakeholders on this call are predominantly Glasgow businesses, and I suspect a lot of them work within the food and drink industry. I'm really keen to get a couple of 2 or 3 examples from you in terms of, what business opportunities there are for organisations to adopt more circular principles within their day-to-day operation.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and that's one of the keys with circular economy, right? Economy is in the word. So it's great to touch on some examples of businesses in the business case. A few that really pop into my mind, one of them is the plant in Chicago, which is quite a neat project because I think it's about 16 SMEs who are all co-located in a specific site, a venue, which enables the flow of byproducts, right? So if they're brewing beer in one site and then that spent grain is going to the mushroom growing facility to use as a substrate, etc. So that industrial symbiosis, as it's often referred to, of taking byproducts from one and using it as a feedstock to give life to a new cycle from another business. It's really neat because they've designed this whole site and the businesses are circular by design, and it's in their core business models. So I want to be citing this properly, but 18,000 kilograms of material is being produced on site, and about 40% of that is being turned into finished products, and the other 60% are byproducts. And I believe it's about 42% of those byproducts are currently being collected and treated in some form, some circular form or another, on site already. And I would definitely recommend folks to check out the Plant Chicago's website, because they did create and launch, I think it was last year, an SME circular toolkit. So that might be a really good resource for folks on the line. Another one on more of the food production side of things, less byproducts, is also from the US, but it's Row 7. And some folks may have heard of Dan Barber, who's a quite well-known chef in the US, at least. And he had some of the origins for this company that's called Row 7, and it's a seed company that is unlike many of the big seed companies that are out there in the world, and actually really focus on agrobiodiversity. So it's about tapping into all the genetic diversity that sits within a specific squash, for instance, or beets. Actually, there's not just one variety, right? There's many. So that's what the seed company is all about. And it's very flavor driven. Everything's grown regeneratively. And because there's a brand around it, it makes it easy for buyers. So food service companies like Baldor, who's a supplier in the US as well, to international groups like Compass Group in the US, they have a collaboration with Baldor as a supplier who works with Row 7, so that they know that they can get these diverse food types, ingredients on their menus, in the canteens that they service, and that they're grown in regenerative ways. Again, that can be helping meet their evolving client needs. So yes, there are all these environmental benefits, but actually it's driven by evolving client values. So these office spaces, companies that have been procuring in the past. So that's another interesting one. And then the last one, of course, on surplus edible food that we want to be preventing from the first set or the outset rather, / redistributing when we are faced with surplus. Winnow is one of the great leading companies out there, innovators, who's applying artificial intelligence to create tools. It's a scale and video platform or video capture platform to help the food service restaurant industry be cutting the waste that's being generated in their kitchens and actually quantifying what the economic value, the loss is. So again, it's really driven by the business case. And I think on average, their customers, the users of Winnow technology, are saving about 2 to 8% of their food costs on average. And they do have some examples, for instance, going back to Compass again, in Singapore, they had about a 55% reduction of food waste worth about $43,000 after they implemented the technology in 2016. So those are quickly just 3 examples of circular economy in action, helping with the business rationale and the bottom line.
Quick examples, but good heavyweight examples for the businesses. Thank you very much, Emma. And a big fan of Dan. I was going to reference him later on, actually, author of The Third Plate. So yes, thank you for beating me to it by bringing his name in. Now, I'd very much like to welcome our 3 other speakers. We have Giovanna Eusebi, co-owner of Glasgow's prestigious East End of Glasgow. No, West End. Apologies, Giovanna. I don't know the geography of my own city. Giovanna's Italian roots, definitely she has the passion of food running through her blood, and has worked very hard to build up strong relationships with her suppliers and believe in the importance of making sure that food is accessible for all. Ylva Haglund, Sector Manager of Zero Waste Scotland, and Ylva's role focuses on tackling consumer food waste on behalf of the Scottish Government, and has been involved in rolling out national campaigns such as Love Food, Hate Waste. And Polly Purvis, OBE, Director of ScotFIN Intelligent Growth Solutions, the Scottish agri-tech business which is building leading-edge vertical farming solutions. And prior to joining IGS, Polly was CEO of Scotland Is, the trade body of the digital industries in Scotland. Guys, I would very much like to welcome you all today. Thank you so much for joining the conversation. Polly, I'd like to go to you first, if that's okay. I suppose just to set a little context in terms of who are Intelligent Growth Solutions and what's your role there?
Okay, so Intelligent Growth Solutions are a Scottish-based agri-tech business, and we specialise in vertical farming. And vertical farming is probably the next step in indoor farming. Everybody's used to seeing plants being grown in greenhouses and polytunnels, but vertical farming has been around now for about 20 years and is really moving indoor farming into a new league. Much of what's traditionally happened in indoor farming has been seasonal. It's all very well growing things under glass, but if you don't, if you're dependent on the sun, in Scotland, we know only too well that only lasts for so many months of the year. So vertical farms are a bit like, in our case, I mean, everybody has slightly different vertical farming solutions, but what we take is, if you imagine taking a field or 2 or 3 allotments and chopping them up into snooker table size pieces, and then putting each of those into a metal tray, we then hang those, suspend those metal trays up in a vertical tower, so they're one above each other, and you depending on the size of the tower, you can take them up to to about 26 or 40 layers, and then we grow different plants in the different layers. And what's exceptional about what Intelligent Growth Solutions is doing is that you can grow different plants in each of those trays. So traditional seems an odd word for a very new technology, but traditional vertical farming tends to be around a monoculture. So lots of people are growing, for example, lettuces in vertical farms. But what we've been able to achieve working with our partners at the James Hutton Institute, who are specialists in crop science in Scotland, is to be able to grow different plants on all different layers, so you can have a variety of crops. And it very much plays into the whole issue of a circular economy, and growing more produce locally, produce that traditionally you can't grow in certain parts of the world in certain locations. So there are global applications for the technology, but clearly in Scotland we know that we only get so many things you can grow outside. Much of our fruit and vegetables comes from overseas, and so trying to tackle all the issues around the drive to net zero, food miles, etc. And my role with ScotFIN is very much about trying to ensure that we develop a network of vertical farms around Scotland to augment what we produce already here. It's very complementary to our current agriculture and horticulture. It's another piece in the jigsaw rather than being a competitor or trying to drive current incumbents out of the business.
Brilliant. Thank you, Polly. You've given us a really good overview of the organisation. And I suppose I'm just thinking back to my introduction when I talked about, what are the economic, what are the human health, and what are the environmental benefits? And it strikes me that Intelligent Growth Solutions covers off all 3 of those areas. Can you give us a little bit more about those benefits?
Well, yes, I think environmentally, there's a whole range of benefits. One of the great things about vertical farming is you actually need very little in terms of inputs, and we certainly don't need insecticides and pesticides. And those have been a real problem for agriculture and horticulture over the last few years. Well, ever since we started using them. It also produces really fresh produce, very high quality produce. And that means that you don't need as much packaging. And Emma was talking about packaging earlier on. That's a real issue for the whole industry. So actually, we at the moment are trying to help with some of the COVID support that's happening in Scotland. And our demonstration farm is in Invergary, just outside Dundee. We're working with the poverty groups there to give them access to the produce that we're growing rather than wasting that. And we just literally cut it and put it in paper bags. And those are recyclable. It doesn't need to go into being gas flashed or washed and then go into plastic. It can go very quickly from the producer to the user, whether that's individuals, shops, restaurants. It's a whole range of opportunities there. So there are a number of ways in which it helps to contribute to that race to net zero. And I think on diet, again, Scotland, we have not a great reputation for having our 5 servings of fruit and vegetables a day. Anything we can do collectively to improve that, and that access to fresh, high quality food helps to, the fresher it is, the better the nutritional values. So that's also impacting on diets. And we do see this as being a very major part of the local economy. I know we're all currently struggling with a slightly unusual situation, but actually, whatever happens throughout COVID, everybody needs to eat. And so the supermarkets, the corner shops, everybody's looking for new suppliers where there's improved food security. But if you look in the wider community, in the longer term, we see opportunities working with restaurants and food processors and caterers and all sorts of people. So it very much fits into that economy, but it's complementary to what's already out there.
Great. And I suppose the systems themselves, I suppose I've got 2 questions for you, Polly. I mean, one, it strikes me that these vertical farms, they're not quite energy intensive, and what steps are you taking to make that more sustainable? And I suppose the second part of my question is around, you've got your traditional farmers. How do you, I suppose, supplement and support them in what they're already doing? I suppose not cannibalizing the existing business. How do you work in partnership?
Absolutely. So just addressing the first one, yes, indoor farming does tend to be fairly power hungry. It's our biggest input is the power. In a country like Scotland, where we're doing so much around renewable energy, connecting up vertical farms with some form of renewable energy will start to make that much more effective from everybody's point of view. In other parts of the world, for example, we're talking to a number of companies in the Middle East, and their actually access to energy with the improvements in photovoltaics and solar panels means that actually that becomes less of an issue. Yes, they're relatively energy hungry, but compared to glass houses, not hugely much more so. And we're working all the time on trying to improve that and working with the renewables companies. As far as working with sort of the traditional farmers and horticulturalists in Scotland or anywhere we put a vertical farm, certainly here, we have a proud tradition of agriculture in Scotland, but we can grow things like potatoes and cauliflowers and Brussels sprouts and things like that very, very effectively. But actually, there is a whole range of vegetables and fruit that we can't grow alternatively, or we have to grow it under cover. So for very many farmers who are looking to diversify, this is a new opportunity for them. And we've seen many farmers find that, for example, if you look at the liquid milk market and what's happened to dairy farming, actually the margins have been driven down so much that it's become very difficult to compete in that market. So we see opportunities for farmers to diversify what it is they grow, and it very much complements what we grow here already, but it's not trying to replicate what we grow here already. In fact, we're talking to some of the growers about whether we can help them with many of the sort of things like cauliflowers and cabbages that you see in the fields in Scotland are actually planted out as seedlings, and those seedlings come in from either the south of England or from places like the Netherlands. And there's a lot of waste in that process, and we've been talking to them about how we might help in their supply chain. And that point that was being made earlier on about shortening supply chains is absolutely where we sit.
Great, thank you very much, Polly. Giovanna, I'd very much like to come to you. Obviously, food has played a huge role throughout your entire life, and you've taken that passion to create a really successful business. I suppose I was wanting to find out more in terms of how you incorporate sustainable practice throughout Eusebi's day-to-day operations.
I think our ethos is that we make real food and not fake food. So it stems from our grandmother in Italy, our grandparents who were farmers, but they farmed the old ways. So I kind of grew up with that through them. And my mother always cooked everything from scratch. So that was all I ever knew. So, when we opened the restaurant, we moved from the East End, from a small deli to an 80-seater restaurant. The ethos was still the same. It was about slowing things down and making from scratch. And we do that by working with like minds, working with small producers, local producers. And that's not just important for, because they are the custodians of biodiversity, and we share those values and we care about what goes on the plate, but that's also good for the community as well. And through COVID, we actually rethought about how we do things. And so now, we've always had seasonal menus, but now we have seasons within the seasons. We've shrunk our menus so that we can change more quickly. So I'm really proud to be working with some great Scottish producers like Mossgiel Farm and East End Allotment, Green Heart Growers, Lunan Bay Farm, Pelham Farm. So they all feature on our menu. They're woven through the story of the plate. But as a restaurateur, I suppose I see myself as the final part of the story, to tell the producer story, with the last custodians of that going to the consumer. So we educate all our team, our chefs, our front of house, some really young kids, about where the food comes from and why it's important to eat well. So yeah, that's important to share these stories and with our customers as well.
Thank you, Giovanna. And I suppose with COVID, there was a move for a lot of restaurants to look at how they offer delivery food. And I know one of the areas that you've been looking at, and we've already mentioned it with our other two speakers, packaging.
Yeah, I mean, it was a chance to, we then had to move our business model from a restaurant to an online deli. We went back to what we did. We made meals from scratch for people just to take home. In the old days, people would bring their plates into the deli in East End, and my mum would fill their plates and they would then take them home. So it was real food made by real people. But now we had to find a kind of way around that, and we quickly realised we were going to be using a lot of packaging. So we found a really good supplier of pulp packaging that can be reused. You can put it in your oven. So that's been a godsend. And obviously we've used a bit of digital as well, just to eliminate, within the restaurant now that we've reopened. So, e-receipts, and we're moving towards an app for our menus. So we're not consuming so much paper. So that's something we'll be doing shortly. So I think the time to pause was really, really important. But I think, food waste is very, very important for me, and educating our team on that is very important. But we don't see it as food waste, we see it as a byproduct. So for example, we make ricotta cheese every day. We use Mossgiel Farm, but we use the whey and we use that in risotto. So, we're just thinking about ways to never throw anything away. And we use the butts of the celery and bring them home, and we grow those, and we had lovely celery flowers a few weeks ago through salad. So yeah, all of that is really important.
And I know that when we went through that awful period where everybody had to shut down, and there was an awful lot of surplus food within the hospitality sector, what did Eusebi's end up doing with that surplus food?
The surplus food, I've worked with a charity called FareShare, so we gave it to FareShare. But we also started then, one of our team, Michael, our general manager, and Kirsten, who worked for us, they had got a call from a homeless charity. So we started cooking. We got surplus food from other shops round about us and suppliers. We couldn't do anything with it, and we started cooking from home. So we would cook about maybe 800 meals a week as a team, and it would be dropped off. We'd have a network of us, drivers, cooks, and that would be dropped off to George Square every evening, some hot meals for the homeless. So that was a good way, and we still incorporate that now. So we've started doing that again. So in the restaurant, we're shut on a Monday. So on a Sunday night at 6 o'clock, and we started using, our surplus food that's there, rather than throwing it out, then we've made that into meals to give to the kindness charity for the homeless.
Thank you, Giovanna. Speaking of surplus food, Ylva, I would like to bring you into the conversation. I know that this has been an area that has been an area that you've been quite passionate about, and you've led an initiative as part of Zero Waste Scotland. Would you like to give us a little bit more information around that initiative?
Yeah, well, it came to our attention, obviously, that there were going to be disruptions along the whole supply chain due to the coronavirus situation. So we wanted to help as much as we could. So this is really to manage those unforeseen gluts. So we set up a matchmaking service, basically. So a really simple way of businesses with surplus food to connect with organizations that could use them in their communities. And this is really for organizations with surplus food who didn't already have a relationship, who didn't already know Fair Share or other kind of local groups. So it's a very simple service. They fill in a form or phone us up, and we basically matchmake them and tell them who's in the area. And the really positive thing as well to come out of that, apart from rescued food, is that we've learned that there's a real appetite from organizations on both sides to build longer term relationships, so to keep working together, as Giovanna says as well.
That's great, and I think it gives us a really clear idea in terms of the role of technology and digital. And Polly, I'd like to come back to you on that very theme. I mean, that is what you live and breathe in terms of digital technical data. Do you feel all of that is absolutely going to play a role for the future of our food systems? And Polly, after you've answered that, Emma, I'd like to bring you in around your thinking on that as well, please.
So I think it's quite a complex question. It's interesting to hear the examples of where digital is being used. And I think I was talking to somebody the other day who's in the festivals business, and they were saying they put their bit festival online this year, and they will not go back to having an only in-person festival in the future, because the digital environment has given them much greater reach. And I think we are all finding out new things about digital that we've been almost forced to do through the lockdown. So, Giovanna was talking about doing away with paper receipts. Everybody's got much more digital in terms of the way they pay for things. But I think there are, certainly in our business, we're using digital every day. We're tracking everything through machine learning and artificial intelligence to make sure that we can constantly improve the growing environment for the plants, to make sure that they are the highest quality, and that we can provide a replicable product. So I think digital threads its way throughout the food sector, and I think particularly in the areas of waste, that ability to make sure that we are connecting up the system is actually helped by digital, whether it's through use of getting useful data and statistics, or just being able to transfer information between people. And I think we will see ourselves relying more and more on that. Having said that, I don't think you can ever get away from what Giovanna was talking about, which is, it's about real food and real people. But it is also about making sure that, all the statistics would suggest that worldwide we do grow enough fruit and vegetables, we do grow enough food, but what we don't do is distribute it cleverly. And digital technologies can help with that. I think that creating the circular economy so that no one goes hungry, and that we're not having actually to create a situation where we've always tried, don't get me wrong, I think what Giovanna's doing is fabulous, and we've been doing some of it at IGS as well with food banks and poverty groups, but we shouldn't need to do that. And we want to get to a system whereby that's not required. And I think that, well, digital is almost an underlying technology here, and it serves and supports what we're trying to do on food. But I think we shouldn't ever get away from the fact that this is about making sure we create, equal supply of good food for everybody, so everybody has great diets. And as Giovanna said so eloquently, it's real food by real people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Emma, I can see you nodding away there. Is there anything else that you'd like to answer to add to Polly's response, although she did respond quite fully?
Yeah, no, just to reinforce how critical digital capabilities are as an enabler, right? Just like policy and finance digital is a key enabler, and some areas that we've seen have deep potential, or rather some of the challenges that we need to overcome, and digital can play a big role, is, again, looking at the city scale, food flows, right? If we're actually going to create resilient systems where we're diversifying the sourcing, we're creating more agile, adaptable systems that are more resilient to shocks, we need to have greater visibility into the aggregated data sets, which, as we've learned so far, at least we haven't come across a city in our work who actually knows at the macro level where the food is coming from, and then what's like where it's coming from, what food it is, how it's being grown, and what are the impacts of it. So that is what I like to think of the story. What's the story of the food's journey? And digital and data capabilities, or data flow rather, is critical for delivering that for the system actors, and then ultimately to the citizens as well, because right now you have no idea really what the story behind your plate is. And likewise, at the same time, be able to track and identify where are the hotspots of organic today waste streams that can be captured and used as inputs, and at the same time, as was already honed in on, the redistribution of existing surplus edible food. How do we deal with time, because time is so critical with food because it's decomposing. So more so than technical material streams, that logistics component is so important.
Great, thank you very much, Emma. Now we've got a very long question from Marion Brown, but I'm going to take a bite size of this question, and I'm going to field it to you, Ylva. Marion is asking, how it's such a colossal topic, and how do small organisations, how do they start that journey to become more circular? Would you like to use this opportunity just to give a little bit more information about the support mechanisms that Zero Waste Scotland offer?
I would love to. Thank you very much. Yes, we've got support available for food businesses to, first of all, to reduce food waste through a food waste reduction business support. This is entirely free, bespoke, at the moment, online waste audits for businesses to show how and how much they can save by stopping food waste. So to date, around 280 businesses have made use of this, and the average typical savings for each business is about £5,000 per year. So I'll give you an example, recent example, as a garden centre cafe who, like most businesses, like most of us as individuals too, said, actually, we don't think we've got any waste, but okay, you can come along. And monitoring their food waste revealed that they actually binned 4 tonnes of food every single year, and so it's costing them around £10,000 each year. So actually looking at what you have is the starting point, and we can help with that. It's entirely free. And then these waste audits will also help identify possible new revenue streams. So another example would be an ice cream company that we recently supported. They sent a lot of honeycomb dust to landfill, and actually just highlighting for them that if they looked at reselling this as a new product instead, this could mean a new revenue income source. And I also really want to mention the Circular Economy Business Support Service. So this gives access to a consultant effectively to help progress the journey towards circular product, service or process. So an example here would be the Glasgow brewery Jaw Brew, who received help to develop their beer from unwanted bread. And there's also a fund that is connected to this, which is also for SME-led projects. So this is for projects that are a bit more developed, so ready for commercialization. And funding starts here at £50,000, goes up to a possible £1 million. An example there would be in Glasgow, we recently funded Revive Eco, who collect used coffee grounds and turn them into chemicals. So we're really hoping that a lot of Glasgow businesses will contact us and ask, how we can help them, because we're ready to support. At the moment, around 10% of the support we provide is for businesses in Glasgow, because I checked before this call, and we would like to speak to a lot more businesses in Glasgow. So loads of information on these things and other things that we do on the Zero Waste Scotland website.
That's great. Thank you very much. So, listen in, all you Glasgow businesses. Zero Waste Scotland are waiting to support you. So don't hold back and get in touch. Giovanna, I was really keen to ask what the future of Eusebi's looks like. What have you got in mind for the months and the years ahead?
Well, I mean, my brother and I feel there's actually an opportunity. We would love more than anything to do some urban growing. That's my dream. I would really love to have. I think that we just don't use the roofs in our cities. We don't use the land lying around us. You can see people who really, there's waiting lists for allotments in the city. So I would really love to do some urban growing for our own restaurant, or perhaps a consortium of restaurants together. And that might even involve vertical growing as well, because I think that's really important and can be, used well in cities and city planning. So I think we should be using every conceivable space, towers, everything we can. And so that's my dream. And my dream is to go back to the East End, and we've just been kicking about at the moment with having a central production unit that's come out of the pandemic, out of our deli business model. And we have a bakery in the East End, a small artisan bakery, so we'd like to merge them together with the school but make that completely, eco-friendly, use the roof, our energy sources in that building, and use it as a training centre as well. So that really is my dream, to have the compost bin, to grow my own food for the restaurant. I think that should be like the blueprint for every urban restaurant and eating establishment in the city.
Great, and I can see that Polly's got a glint in her eye there as you speak about urban farming. Polly, I'm curious to know if you've got plans for any vertical farms or urban farming within Glasgow. I know Glasgow's got a number of brownfield sites. Have you got any plans coming up?
So just to put it into perspective, IGS is really a manufacturer of vertical farming systems. So we don't and won't operate farms. But what we will do is partner with people who want to operate vertical farms to help them get set up. But they are ideal for brownfield sites. And Giovanna's right, they're ideal for city environments because they have a fairly small footprint in terms of, because you're going up rather than out. They don't need to be built on high quality arable land. So they're not taking good quality growing land out of production. They can very easily go onto brownfield sites. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So open to offers there in that case. Emma, I want to come back to you, and then after I've spoken to Emma, I'm going to ask each of the panel to come back with their one piece of advice for our delegates, so you can get your thinking caps on. But first of all, Emma, what role could the City of Glasgow and its businesses take to support this ambition and to turn it into a reality? What advice would you give to our city as a whole?
Yeah, I think, and I want to pick up on one of the other questions that came through in the chat, just the importance of cities. And so cities are the destinations, expected to be the destinations of 80% of the world's food by 2050. And at the same time, cities today are accumulating about 2.9 billion tons of organic waste materials each year, so food byproducts and sewage, but less than 2% is actually being collected and treated in a circular way. So cities have this massive influence and potential to send out positive ripples and create symbiotic relationships that are benefiting rural production communities and the citizens and urban places and actors within them as well. So I would love to see Glasgow really be a leader in taking that holistic approach and understanding, which is a new journey for many cities, understanding that relationship between the spaces of it's not just about the city as an island, but the relationship and the land that it's dependent on for surviving and thriving. So that would be one hope for me.
Great. Thanks very much, Emma. So my final question to each of you. Obviously, we have businesses who work within the food and drink sector and would be very much looking to potentially start their circular journey. If you were to give them one piece of advice, what would that be? And I will start with Ylva.
Well, I guess for me it's obvious. So taking action on food waste is something that you can do right now to be more resilient as a business. So that would be my one advice.
Thank you very much. Polly.
Well, I don't know, it's quite a big subject, isn't it? I think I'd really like to build on some of the things other people have said, and that is, how do we bring smaller businesses together to act in collaboration and partnership, to be able to create new sources of food, grow more food locally, do more with it, and make sure that we improve all of our diets, and at the same time make sure that we're also picking up on Emma's point, using the waste product to help to, for example, revitalize our soils, which across certainly the Western world we've been depleting for years now. So I think there's huge opportunities, but I think we absolutely have to involve small to medium-sized businesses in that.
Great, thank you. Giovanna?
I think for me it would be, just take it in baby steps, because if you're a small business, often people think, it costs lots of money, when in fact, using actually better suppliers and seeing waste as taste, that we actually operate more efficiently. But I think, take baby steps. You can only, the way I see it is, I can only change one plate at a time. So everything is just one plate, one dish at a time. And the most important thing for our business and smaller businesses around about us in an urban environment to celebrate local and celebrate seasonal.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. And last but certainly by no means least, Emma.
Yeah, I would say if you're in the midst of taking first steps and developing what I'll call circular native business, right, is going back to basics a bit and looking at those three principles that make up the circular economy, which is indeed about designing out waste and pollution, but it's also more than that, because it's about keeping materials and products in use, and most importantly with food, regenerating natural systems. So depending on what your business is and the nature of it, how does you apply those principles to be part of your core business, not some add-on CSR motivation or sustainability arm, but actually in your business, so that's going to be profitable. And that does take working in new ways and being innovative, not from a technological standpoint, but the way that you're doing things, and often comes with collaboration. I know a question in the chat came through earlier of how do you deal with the competition, and I would challenge back to that. It doesn't need to be competition. Can there be pre-competitive spaces where collaborations are facilitated? And that's something that we've been working on in developing in our cities.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think you'll agree that there is, and I swore I wouldn't use this phrase, plenty of food for thought from today's session. I want to thank all my panelists. You've raised a whole wealth of really interesting topics, ideas, innovations. So I'm sure that I will be joined by everyone else with a virtual round of applause for your participation. Thank you so much for giving up the time and adding to the conversation. Thank you. I'd also like to say thank you very much to you, our delegates, for joining us today. Very much appreciated you being involved in the bigger conversation. And if you enjoyed today, we have one final session tomorrow at 10 o'clock. The session is themed around manufacturing, and we have speakers from Scottish Leather Group, Beauty Kitchen, Scotland's Bravest Manufacturing, and Road Spikes in the Netherlands. So do join my colleague Cheryl tomorrow at 10 o'clock for our final session. Finally, I've got two more things to let you know about. The first is, if there's anything that you've heard today which has made you think, well, I would like to find out more, I would like to speak to somebody, by all means, please get in contact with the Circular Glasgow team directly. And you can do that through the expo area on this platform, or by simply visiting the website or traditionally picking up the phone, we'd be delighted to speak to you. And the final point, if you'd like to continue the conversation, our networking is now open and will be open for the next 30 minutes. So it's a great opportunity for you to connect with one another and to continue those discussions. All that remains for me to say is thank you very much for joining us and have a good day.